Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our Raw Reaction series and our 8 a.m. Arsenal transfer show. The show which keeps you up to date with all of the latest Arsenal transfer information and tries to make some sense of the chaos that we find ourselves dealing with every single day as Arsenal fans. Good morning, chat box. Good morning to everyone that's joining us live, and good morning if you are joining us on catch up as well. Please make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's try and get up to 100 likes with the first 5 to 10 minutes of the show. Smash that like button, people. Really show that appreciation. The fact that we are live from the Lake District, and a few people asking in the comments saying, where's the background gone? For those that have been living under a rock and are not aware of the fact that I am currently on holiday, but still putting away these 8 a.m. shows for you. And good morning to everyone in the chat box. I wish I could go through and highlight some of your comments, but I don't have a mouse. I forgot to bring my mouse with me, so I'm working with the the laptop keypad, which is the most annoying thing in the world. So apologies if I can't highlight loads of your comments like I usually would, but I'm working with this touchpad and it's horrible. I don't know how I ever coped without a mouse in my life. Anyway, we are going to go straight on to the news. Before we do, though, I did see a really great comment in the chat box as I was loading up the show. People asking questions in the chat about who certain players are. And then this comment comes in from Samron, who says, love this chat. You're all just so kind, which is just great. It shows the community that we've built here. It shows the fact that if someone comes into the chat asking a question, you're all happy to answer them. You're happy to welcome them to the chat if they're new. And I think that just goes to show the community that we're building here at TGT, and it's an amazing achievement to have all you guys every single day. Now, there's some stuff that we need to talk about. It's the Peak District, Adam, not the Lake District. Did I say the Lake District? I meant the Peak District. Did I say? I'm getting my districts mixed up now. Let's move on to kind of the news, and we start off with a little bit of a somber story, unfortunately, and specifically the health of our former CEO, Ivan Gazidis, who was diagnosed yesterday, it became official, with throat cancer, which is obviously absolutely gutting. No matter what your feelings around Ivan Gazidis and the job that he did at Arsenal, no matter what, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Football goes out the window when we're talking about health. So I do want to wish Ivan and his family all the best, absolutely. And I mean, I lost my granddad to throat cancer, so I'm very much well aware of the kind of the reality of that situation. And on this subject, of course, Gooners versus Cancer, which is something that's going on right now, right at the moment. I've left a link to it in the description. Very appropriate to talk about it. If you would like to show some support, try and help us fight stuff like this that's going on, then please do hit the link in the description and go and support it. But a massive speedy recovery to Ivan, and we wish him the absolute best for the future, and hope he recovers and battles through this awful period of time that he's going to have to face. So thoughts are with you, Ivan. Moving on to the next bit of news, which is, again, is not transfer news, but it's still very important. And whilst I am away, I'm limited in the amount of shows that I can do. So I do want to cover some of this stuff. The US tour was obviously cancelled. And for those fans that obviously either are travelling there, that are in the US, that are going to go and see their first ever Arsenal game, absolutely gutting for you guys. And really, genuinely, I can only apologise for nothing to do with me, of course, but I can only apologise that a lot of your plans, I know, have been ruined because of this. Hopefully, some stuff can take place to fill as much of the void as possible. It's going to be tricky, and I know that the tournament is still going ahead. So if you are still planning to go into Florida for this, then have a great time and enjoy it as best you can. However, there is some important stuff to talk about, because it hasn't been revealed which players in the Arsenal travelling group have tested positive and which members of the training staff that you imagine have also been, and there have been loads of people in close contact with one another. But it does bring into question how this is going to affect Arsenal's pre-season, because, of course, last year the pre-season was heavily affected by the pandemic, and heavily affected so much that we could barely get kind of any real tangible training time under a new coach in Arteta. And this time, once again, Arteta's pre-season is being interrupted, and it's being very much affected by this. And so how it's going to affect the plans ahead of the games in the Premier League. We do have some games, of course, against Chelsea and Spurs in London before the season actually starts. And so that's something that the club will do. I imagine what will happen is that some behind closed doors friendlies will be announced internally, of course, and they'll probably play some behind closed doors games. I'd be surprised if they manage to organise any kind of games that go public. I really, really would. I'd be very surprised if that happened. But I imagine that's what's going to take place, is that they'll schedule in some fixtures with the players that obviously are not going to be self-isolating, are not going to be dealing with the positive test that they've received, of course, and that will take place there. But this is absolutely gutting for fans, for the club, for Arteta. And we'll see how this plays out, how will it affect certain things. But it is a real big shame that this has obviously happened, and the fact that people are missing out on games, and Arteta and the squad are missing out on some really key parts of pre-season as well, which sucks. It really genuinely does suck. And you can imagine that this is going to continue into the season, and that the pandemic's effect on football is certainly not over by any stretch of the imagination. And we are going to still have to deal with the fact that in the UK, all of the laws kind of around the pandemic and lockdown are loosening. And obviously 2 days ago it was, as they described it, Freedom Day, which is strange. So that obviously means that where people are going to be mixing, masks are being worn less often, and people are in closer contact. I imagine that you're going to see more positive cases in the Premier League, and certain players are going to be missing for certain fixtures. So it's going to be a weird season, but we'll see how it goes, and obviously we'll keep you up to date with all of the latest news that does break in regards to this. Let's move on to the transfer stories. Make sure you're dropping a like on the video, guys, if you're tuning in live, as always. First of all, we've got a quote directly from the Roma general manager, Thiago Pinto, who was asked about Granit Xhaka, and he simply said that we'll see what happens with Xhaka. And they are obviously now directly mentioning Granit Xhaka in their quotes and in their stories. It's not being kind of pushed aside or under the carpet. They're not being coy about it. It's still very much a story that is going to be developing. And reports emerging from Italy yesterday that Roma are expected to go in. Football London also understands that Roma are expected to improve their bids in the coming days and improve that side of things. So hopefully it becomes a bid that Arsenal are willing to accept. We can move on from this moment, and Granit Xhaka can move on to Roma and do what he does best, which I think will be very good in Serie A. I think he will do really well there, but we will have to wait and see. But that one looks like it's going to be closing in the next week or so. Moving on to our next story, and Reiss Nelson. Reiss Nelson linked previously in the window of the move to Olympiacos, and yet again, reports came out yesterday that Olympiacos are indeed discussing the possibility of a loan deal with Reiss Nelson. Now, a contract offer from Arsenal is already on the table, according to Chris Wheatley, for Reiss Nelson. He is yet to sign that contract extension because he doesn't yet know his future. He doesn't know how he is seen by the club, and I'm not surprised he hasn't signed that contract yet. But this loan to Olympiacos, should it go through, I would imagine it would be a little bit strange to see him leave on loan without a contract being signed. But there is other news about Reiss Nelson maybe being offered in other scenarios that we'll talk about in a little bit. Tammy Abraham, now this is a story that came out from The Sun yesterday, who have been getting some decent exclusives over the last couple of weeks or so. Some of the stuff that they have reported on has indeed turned out to be quite true. So I thought it was important that we covered this story, and specifically the report and the exclusive that came out from The Sun, that Arsenal are now leading the race for Tammy Abraham, and specifically over a possible loan with an obligation to buy at the end of the season for a figure around £40 million. Now, we assume that it wouldn't be a one-off payment and it would be structured. But Arsenal, of course, this summer are focusing much of their financial investment in other areas of the pitch. Striker was never going to be an area that Arsenal were going to be pushing very hard for in terms of investment. So a loan with an obligation would actually suit Arsenal's kind of prerogative of how they're spending their money. This deal divides a lot of people. I am going to attempt to do a tactical breakdown at some stage. It may be when I get back, but I'm looking to do one to give you guys kind of all of that information, if possible, as soon as possible, on Tammy Abraham, to compare him and compare his stats and his statistics and his obviously metrics about how he compares to some of the other players in our team. A loan with an option, I think, would be better depending on how that option goes and if it leads towards an obligation, certain clauses being activated. What I would say is that you shouldn't write this off. I don't think you should just say, no, not good enough, not for me. Do some research, look into it, and try, obviously, to find out if it would be, say, a decent move for Arsenal to make. A 23-year-old homegrown striker that scored more goals in a single Premier League season than Lacazette has been able to do in the last 3 seasons is good. It is a good return. I think there is a lot of there's a big association around Chelsea players and Arsenal, We've had Willians, we've had David Luiz's, we've had the Petr Cech scenario. We know that we've signed a fair few strikers in our day, or rather players from Chelsea in our day, that have not exactly gone to plan. I think you have to separate that with this and just kind of focus on it in its own individual sense and not focus on the fact that he is a Chelsea player. But look at him as a player and as an individual, and we'll try and do that as best we can on a tactical breakdown show dedicated specifically to Tammy Abraham. I'm not going to say yes or no right now. I need to do more research into this, but I'm certainly not going to push it aside and completely disregard it. So we'll see how this one moves forward. We now move on to Aaron Ramsdale as a story. Again, Arsenal reportedly are pushing for a deal to try and sign Ramsdale as Arsenal's backup keeper for next season. Sheffield United are supposedly wanting a figure upwards of £20 million. They signed him for just under that from Bournemouth, of course, the season prior. So it's unsurprising that they want to try and get an improvement and a profit on their investment. One, again, that divides a lot of opinion amongst the fan base, but I suggest you do a little bit kind of research on him. He is pretty decent for a goalkeeper. But I still think that the figures that are being associated with this are quite excessive. And that's probably an understatement. If I was looking to sign Aaron Ramsdale as a backup goalkeeper, I'd be looking to £10 to £15 million, not 20 million upwards. But that is the situation that we find ourselves in. Moving then on to Nandez, who is a Cagliari centre midfielder, kind of box-to-box style centre midfielder. Now, reportedly, according to kind of these reports coming out from Italy, that Arsenal have actually had a proposal rejected by the player for a move. He is the style of midfielder that Arsenal are kind of looking for in that number 8 role to bring in. I have absolutely no knowledge of Nandez whatsoever. However, should these links persist, we will obviously do the relevant research and get the expert insight for you guys specifically. To find out as much as we can. There is information out there, and we're going to have a word with a couple of people should these links intensify. But it is a random report coming out of Italy that we have covered. I wouldn't read too much into that right now because it does need to be confirmed by other sources. But it's a very random one to come forwards, but one that I thought was important that we touch upon. But I wouldn't read too much into this one whatsoever. Now we move on to an interesting story that came out of the Sport Mail yesterday, which is around James Maddison. This broke late last night that Arsenal are putting together a plan to sign James Maddison from Leicester. We know of Arsenal's interest. It's been confirmed by the AFC Bell, by Football London, by plenty of sources now that Arsenal are indeed interested in James Maddison. Talk of a bid, talk of possible kind of talks between the player and the club have not yet emerged from credible sources. And I very much doubt that has yet taken place. However, the interest from Arsenal does seem to be very real, and whether or not they will push for a signing is yet to be seen. But the report coming out from the Sports Mail yesterday was indeed that they will be offering some players to try and sweeten the deal for Leicester. And two of those players that were brought up were Reiss Nelson and Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Now, Leicester, of course, were interested in Ainsley Maitland-Niles back in January of 2021 as a possible destination to take him on loan for the rest of the season, and even, I think, for a permanent deal at the time too. They didn't end up doing that. He did obviously go off to West Brom. But it's still valued between 15 and 18 million pounds as a former or current England international, really, because obviously he could still get called out once again. He's still 23 years of age, very useful in different positions on the pitch. And Leicester do tend to kind of suffer with a fair few injuries, and he would be very useful to them. Reiss Nelson, I don't really see where Reiss Nelson would fit into Leicester City's plans. They've got plenty of options in their forward lines, in their attacking midfield areas. And I just think that it would be a little bit of a strange one if they was to go to Reiss Nelson, especially considering that we're struggling to move Reiss Nelson to almost anywhere right now. It's an unsurprising story. I would happily have Maddison in my club. Absolutely no questions asked. But the realism surrounding a possible deal for Leicester is still very, very far-fetched. Arsenal to put in a bid that would be acceptable to Leicester, you're looking at upwards of £70 million. And once Arsenal has spent the amount of money that they have already done on Ben White and a centre midfielder, possibly a right-back, seeing them spend another 80-odd million quid on James Maddison, or by sweetening it with a couple of players, still seems a little bit too much of a stretch for them this summer. I'd be shocked if Arsenal got this deal done or if Arsenal even went in with a serious bid of that amount, it would still definitely shock me. And I know that there's been plenty of people trying to claim that Arsenal have stepped up their interest in him. That is so far nothing credible that we can confirm at this point in time. And it is still very much one that is, what's the right word? Speculatory, if that's speculative is the right word that we want to call it, because it is that. And I very much doubt Arsenal will be going in for a bid. However, the Sports Bell does also report that Renato Sanches is being targeted should James Maddison not be a possible deal, which I find odd considering that they are very different players of different positions. But that is the report that has come out that Arsenal are interested in Maddison. And if not, we'll move for Renato Sanches of Lille, who, of course, will be available for a certain figure because of the media pro situation in Liga, causing these French teams to need to bring in money as much as feasibly possible to cope with the rigours of a financially strapped season. And that does conclude our news for the day in regards to the transfers. We move on now to the second part of the show. We're going to try and go through as many questions as we can from you guys in the chat box. So if you do have a question that you would like to throw into the chat box for the next 15 minutes or so, we will try and go through as many of them as feasibly possible. Stephen Foote says, do you think that Charles Watts is a credible source? Of course, Charles Watts is a credible source. He has some fantastic contacts and does some really hard work to find out the information that he gets. So yes, if Charles Watts reports it, I would certainly advise you to believe it. Reece Harvey says, what do you think Arsenal will do for people that paid £28 for the 4 matches but only got to watch 2? You would imagine, Reece, that they would refund. That would be the sensible option. However, what they could do is they could turn around and say, if you've paid 4 matches for the Rangers games, they will now open up access for the Spurs and Chelsea games. That could be something that they choose to do so they don't lose money on that. So they may just open it up to watch whatever games replace those fixtures, or they might extend that watch period for those that can now go and watch the Chelsea and Spurs games. But we will have to wait and see. Wilson says, Tom, why do you not rate Aouar? I mean, I've talked about this a lot. And it's not necessarily about not rating Aouar for his quality. Aouar is a player with a lot of quality. It's just how he kind of applies that quality to the pitch. Aouar tends to struggle with consistent performances. You can turn out an 8 out of 10 performance, 8 plus out of 10 performance, but it's not going to be coming more often than, say, 2-3 times out of 10 games. And I'm not sure that I want Arsenal to go out and sign a player that is inconsistent. I also talk about the fact that, yes, he's available for a very, very reasonable price of around 25 million euros, we're led to believe. But why spend 25 million euros on an inconsistent player with a player that lacks attitude in the right direction as well, as we hear from French media expert Jeremy Smith? So that's why it's not a case. It's not a case that I don't rate his quality. I think he's got the potential to be a great player. But I just think it's way too much of a risk on a position that we desperately need to improve upon. And for that reason, I am very hesitant for Arsenal to move for Aouar. Now, I'm not saying that if he does come, I'm not going to get behind him. I think that's ridiculous. And I hope for anyone that doesn't necessarily want to see Aouar or Tammy Abraham or any of these players, Ben White, who didn't necessarily want to see those players sign for Arsenal, when they do, and if they do, when they do, you should really be looking to get behind them, whether you wanted them or not, and backing them to succeed and prove you wrong, because them turning things around from your view of that being necessarily a negative is a good thing for Arsenal. So there's my thoughts on Aouar. Once again, we'll send for you. So I hope that's fine. Vishal, thank you ever so much for becoming a new member. Really appreciate the support, fella, as always. You can have a look in the community tab if you are indeed an expert member or a TGT ambassador. And there should be a new link to join our Discord server, where you can join a 24/7 community of this fantastic group of people that listen into the shows every single day. Matt G says, thoughts on the Ben White holiday fake out? I don't know what you're on about, Matt. I've been a little bit disconnected over the last couple of days whilst on holiday. I'm aware that he's been, is it in Rome? And people have been tracking his flights. I imagine he'll be returning to the UK to complete his medical after the 26th, is what we're led to believe. But I don't know what you mean by a fake out. So if the holiday is fake, that would be very, very, very curious as to why that's gone on, Matt. Ish says, who would you prefer between Ødegaard, Maddison or Matheus Pereira? I think you would have to pick Maddison at 3. I really like Martin Ødegaard. I think he's a fantastic player with a great potential, really good passing statistics, and the way that he moves the ball into the box so directly. I like Matheus Pereira. I think he's transitioned to the Premier League from his promotion with West Brom really well. 11 goals last season, some assists, can play as a cam, can play as a 7, can play as an 11. can play anywhere in that front attacking midfield 3 positions. And if Arsenal did end up going for him, I would be pleased to see that, because I think it would be a little bit of a smart move for Arsenal. However, if money is no option and you're asking me of the 3 which I would prefer, James Maddison would certainly be at the top of the list. So Hill says, Tom, you didn't cover the Locatelli news about the agent of the Juve player saying that Arsenal have made a bid, mainly because it's not really anything more than we already know. We know that Arsenal have made a bid. It's been confirmed several times by different outlets and different kind of sources. Sure, we can talk about it. Arsenal have, it's been said by Locatelli. It's not Locatelli's agent. It's the agent of, is it Fiogli? I think his name is something like that, along that lines. That is his agent, who's been involved in possible news about a swap deal, has said that Arsenal have indeed made a bid. That it's not new news. We know that Arsenal have made a bid. It's just now about waiting. We're just waiting to see that whether or not, anyway, that he will choose Juventus or will choose Arsenal. So we will have to wait and see. Let's scroll down a little bit more to Usman, who says, Tom, why doesn't Arsenal go for Dani Olmo if they can try it for Maddison and Ødegaard? The thing about Dani Olmo is very difficult. He currently plays for RB Leipzig. He's on a very decent contract, and they have Champions League football next season, of which he is an integral part of their team. He would cost a hell of a lot of money. And if you're thinking from his perspective, you've got a Bundesliga challenging team now in RB Leipzig. You've got Champions League football next season. It would be a little difficult to imagine Arsenal being able to convince him to move away from a guaranteed spot in a Champions League side that could do quite well and has reached recently the semi-finals of that competition. So it's tricky. I understand why you would say, why, if we're going for these guys, why not this guy? But there is a few reasons, and I hope those answers your question. Ron Rash says, morning coffee, Sig, and a TGT. Keep up the great work. Any players that we aren't looking at that you would be picking as a good fit as a striker? It's an interesting question because there are quite a few strikers on the continent that are looking. Leicester have just signed Patson Daka from Red Bull Salzburg. But if you wanted another name from Red Bull Salzburg that's a very interesting player, Ron, I would be looking at someone like Sekou Koita, who is very much gone under the radar. He didn't play towards the end of the season because of a suspension, it was a little strange. Do a little bit of reading into it and you'll see why it was a little strange. But Sekou Koita is a fantastic talent at Red Bull Salzburg, and certainly one that I think is going to be picked up by a big club in the next couple of years or so. So if you were looking for an interesting player to be linked to, that certainly is one of them. Sim says, Jordan Henderson to Arsenal. Now, the thing about this story, and I see a lot of people actually talking about the possibility of Jordan Henderson joining Arsenal. Now, Henderson is 31 years of age, okay? Now, Arsenal have done this before. We've gone out and signed Willian. We've gone out and signed David Luiz. We've signed Petr Cech. We've signed these players, and all of them, ironically, are Chelsea players. We've gone out and signed players over the age of 30. Lichtsteiner comes to mind as well. And I'm just not sure that's the right way for Arsenal to progress in kind of their squad building, in terms of the way they want to progress in the market and add players to their teams. They need to be looking at younger profile players with sell-on value. It's not to say that you just sign kids. I think looking at players from the ages of 27 to 28, I mean, you look at the Thomas Partey signing, that adds experience, it adds leadership. But I'm not sure signing, again, a 30-plus-year-old player is the right move for Arsenal when they desperately need to improve the sell-on value capacity of their squads. And so I lean away, Sim, from that one specifically. Zoezi says, would you take Renato Sanches as a 10? No, because I think he's more of a box-to-box midfielder. I wouldn't take him anyway. I think for the figure that Lille would want, and I think it would certainly increase with the amount of interest that's going for him, even though it still would be fairly reasonable. For me, Renato Sanches is too much of a risk. He doesn't offer enough in the right aspects for me. He's great on the ball. He's a really good dribbler and good progressor of the ball. And he can take a decent shot from outside the box. But his defensive statistics and his passing statistics are not enough to convince me that he is better than, say, bringing in a Ruben Neves, for example, or bringing in a Locatelli-style player. I want someone that can do jobs in both directions, not just be a progressive ball carrier. I want someone that's got multiple talents, that's got really good tackling, really good passing, and someone that still gets ourselves out of tricky situations with their technical skill. And I don't think that Renato Sanches has all of those abilities. He has also got a big injury history of problems that he misses more than 10 games on average a season. And if you're going to invest in a key position like that, I'm not sure that's the right choice. He still wasn't a main starter at Lille last season. He wasn't able to get into the team as a starter regularly to say that he was their out-and-out kind of central midfield player. So he's still got a lot of questions that even in the French league, they're asking. So there you go. Philip says, Tom, straight pick between Tammy or DCL? DCL all day long. It's not on, it's absolutely no shadow of a doubt which one I would pick at all. Mr. Harrison Carnaby says, have you heard any more about these few South American players that we have brief links with earlier in the window? There were a couple, weren't there, Harrison? We had Mateus Martinelli from Fluminense. That's gone very, very quiet. We did a tactical breakdown on him with thanks to some of the experts down there that gave some really interesting news on him. It's an odd one because I think those links are just basically where people have become aware of the fact that Arsenal are kind of keeping tabs on these guys. They're interested, they're scouting them. And obviously it's very easy then to build a story from that to say Arsenal want to sign them when in fact they're just scouting. And Arsenal scout hundreds of players and analyse hundreds of players. So it's very easy then to pick up on a story, then report it and say Arsenal are looking to sign them when it's not actually the case. And I think that's probably what happened with Mateus Martinelli, he's an interesting player. He's someone that I think I'll certainly be keeping tabs on and finding out a little bit more about him. And then the other one was Maddison from Grêmio, the right back, and Yuri Alberto as well, a Brazilian striker playing in the Brazilian top flight too. So there's been a few South American players that we've been linked to, but no moves specifically for any of them so far. So there's still a lot to go and a lot more to find out about those. Social, thank you ever so much for finally becoming a member. I know you've been a long-time listener of the show, so I really appreciate you stepping up your membership, mate. Really genuinely do, and you're a fantastic addition to our community here. Rich says, new member, Tom. You are indeed rich. We appreciate your support. You joined the other day. If we are spending 70 million on Maddison, you might as well go for Grealish for 80. I think Grealish is going to go for more, Rich, if I'm honest. I think Grealish, you're looking at upwards of £100 million to get him in, to be honest. Only a little extra, really, and a better player, plus Emirates is his favourite stadium. I think that, yeah, as I say, I think Grealish is going to cost you upwards of £100 million. So that's the issue with the Grealish thing. I understand that Arsenal got interest. Who doesn't have interest in Jack Grealish? He's an amazing footballer. Really like him. But I just don't think it's within Arsenal's capacity to look to bring him in. Assassin says, why do we need a homegrown goalkeeper? Couldn't we do that in other areas to try and steal Onana under Leon's nose? It doesn't make sense spending over 20 mil when we can use that in the midfield. Now, it's a very good question, Assassin. Why are Arsenal specifically targeting a backup goalkeeper that is of homegrown nature when there aren't loads that immediately spring to mind that would make a lot of sense? Because Aaron Ramsdale and Sam Johnson are going to cost you a fair chunk of money. Freddie Woodman has still got a lot of questions about him. And you think, if you're going to invest in someone like Freddie Woodman, yes, it wouldn't be that expensive, but I'm not sure that he would offer you the quality you need. There are others. I like Cole Darlow, for instance, at Newcastle. I think that might be a decent option for Arsenal to go for. And he's proven himself as a very good backup goalkeeper and starting goalkeeper for Newcastle at times in the Premier League. The reason why Assassin Arsenal are actually going for these homegrown goalkeepers is because of obviously the homegrown quota that we find ourselves in. Before we moved on Mavropanos and we moved on Guendouzi and we moved on Saliba, and Saliba didn't actually count as part of this, Arsenal are actually already at their capacity of 17 non-homegrown players. They've obviously moved on Mavropanos now, which means that we've gone slightly under, but then we brought that back up by bringing in Nuno Tavares from Benfica. We've also looked to bring in Sambi Lokonga, who is, again, another non-homegrown player. There are a number of players that Arsenal are looking to move on from their non-homegrown quota, like, say, a Kolasinac, that is obviously we're expecting to not be here. It would be very strange. Willian is another one that could leave as well. There are a few on our books. Lucas Torreira could also go. Granit Xhaka is another one that could go. We expect him to go within the next week or so. And yes, that would bring us under that non-homegrown quota within the squad. The problem is there's always been kind of this threat that the FA or the Premier League would once again raise the number of homegrown players that are needed in the squad in a way in which they're looking to kind of propel the English national team and to kind of encourage those players to improve the amount of homegrown players, in their squads. And so I think a lot of clubs are targeting a lot of homegrown players to bring in at the moment because they are worried that that non-homegrown quota could be reduced in the coming seasons. That's why they're looking. And if you are going to fill up a spot in your squad with a homegrown player, bringing in a backup goalkeeper is a pretty risk-free kind of area to do so. So I hope, Assassin, that answers your question. Chig says, Tom, do you fancy a decent number 8 or 10 that can improve our team without commanding a big signing on fee? Are you talking there specific? I assume you're going to talk about there maybe a free transfer, because if you're talking about signing on fees and stuff like that, usually you associate that with a non kind of a free transfer, as we've seen with the Willians of this world and the Cedrics of this world at times. Obviously, I'd rather see us push for both of those positions, because both are important. We need to find someone in the 8 mould that can partner Thomas Partey, that has good options both offensively and defensively. But we do need a number 10, because we know that Emile Smith-Rowe is not the most fit consistently type of player and does suffer with those injury problems. So all of those things considered, I think I'm going to cheat here, Chig, and say that I think both of those are ultimately are really important for us this summer. Neil De Souza says, Tom, I hope you're having a great vacation. Thank you, mate. I am. It's been it's a lot of walking. 7-mile hike yesterday. It's not a holiday. Got another one today, another one tomorrow. So holiday is what we describe it as. I'm not being negative, and the players so far signed are backup players, not the starting 11. Neil, I understand your frustrations. I get it. And I understand that we're obviously less than a month now away from the starting of the Premier League. The thing is that I just think we need to be a little bit more, you're not going to like this word, but patient at times, because we still need to move on players. That's the biggest thing for us right now, is we're waiting to move on Xhaka, we're waiting to move on Bellerin, we're waiting to move on the likes of Torreira and Kolasinac and maybe Willian as well. And once those are done, Arsenal can start to do more incomings. It's tricky right now. We've signed some decent players. Tavares looks like to be a very interesting backup left back that I've still got questions and reservations about. Lokonga's a fantastic piece of business that we've needed to try and do more of that kind of business, of a young prospect that has already got those leadership qualities and is really highly rated for a decent figure. Bring those guys in. And then we look like we're bringing in Ben White. Now, if you'd have asked me at the start of the window, do I think that Arsenal are going to spend £50 million plus on a centre-back, I would have said you're mad. But we've done it, and it might turn out to be a really good bit of business, because Ben White was a highly coveted player by Premier League clubs, interesting. Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester City and Manchester United. He has the potential to be in England starting centre-back in the future. He's homegrown, which is really important, as we've talked about. And that's a good bit of business for the club to get done. However, we do need to do more. So, Neil, I'm completely on side with you as well. Caruson says, Tom, I know you don't play FIFA anymore, but what about Football Manager? Have you tried an FM save as Arsenal? Now, I haven't played Football Manager for a couple of years either. I kind of dipped in and out of it a bit, just mainly because I was too busy watching real-life football to play kind of the virtual side of things. But I haven't tried an Arsenal save since about Football Manager 2014, so a long, long time ago. It may have even been before that. It was the year that we signed Olivier Giroud. That was the last time I did an Arsenal save on FM. And I've never tried to play it really since. So maybe it's something I need to look into. Aouar and Nandez, or just Maddison, says Daniel. It depends, doesn't it? Because if you're saying that if it's Aouar or Neves or just Maddison, sorry, Aouar and Neves or Maddison on his own, does that mean we don't sign the centre midfielder? Because that's a really key position for us. And because Aouar can play in a more advanced role, I'd lean more towards Daniel, the option, the first two, because it covers more bases. But if you're telling me that James Maddison we brought in and we'd still find someone else to play centre mid, I'd probably lean towards the latter. Philip says, not what you think Mikel would do, but what formation would you pick if it was up to you? It's a good question, because we have a lot of varying members of the Arsenal squad, which means that you could play a whole variety of different formations, Philip. I think personally I would lean still towards a kind of a 4-3-3. I like the idea of playing the 2 number 8s with a number 6 in behind to give Partey that security. I wouldn't play Partey as a number 6. I'd play him as a number 8. Play him as a box-to-box midfielder, allow him to progress the ball, allow him to recover possession and break up play, and still be progressive of his passing. And if you play him at 6, I just think it limits what Thomas Partey gives you. And so therefore, that's something that I would look to avoid. And I like the idea of maybe Lokonga telling us that he likes to play as a number 6. And you never know. Lokonga could turn out to be a future star in that position for Arsenal. So we'll have to wait and see. So 4-3-3. We're going to go through a couple more questions, and then we're going to have to wrap up. Wow says, would you like to see Abraham at Arsenal? Look, wow, I'm not going to completely disregard this idea. I know that a lot of people already have, and they've just said, no, not for me, no more Chelsea rejects. And I'm really trying to avoid using the term Chelsea reject, because I think you need to look at every player individually. We are going to try and do a tactical breakdown on Tammy Abraham as soon as possible and give you guys as much information on the striker as we can. The thing is that a homegrown 23-year-old striker that's got a good goal return when he plays as a starting consistent striker in the Prem is not something that you should turn your nose up at. It's just a situation where I think it's tricky because of the price and because of the risk. And it is a risk. A loan with an option would interest me, but a loan with an obligation or a straight kind of fee, that's just a bit risky for the figures that we're seeing talked about. So that's my thoughts. But yeah, it's one that we definitely need to kind of be aware of and just be a little bit wary of. But I don't think it's one that you should disregard off the bat without doing a little bit more research and patience. I mean, Jake Walker says, weren't De Bruyne, Lukaku, Salah, Chelsea rejects? Exactly. And this is what I'm saying, is you can't just associate someone that leaves Chelsea for Arsenal is necessarily always going to be a bad deal. It would be naive, in my opinion, to do that. So exactly, that's something that I think we need to think about for sure. A couple more and then we'll wrap up. GGTV for you says, Tammy Abraham only got one more better goal difference than Lacazette. Is he really worth it? He did, as a 23-year-old homegrown striker. He's got a hell of a lot more improvement, a hell of a lot more development, whereas you've got Lacazette that's in his prime playing in the Premier League. So that's kind of the context of the situation. Playing in a Chelsea team that wasn't able to bring through any real signings because they were banned at the time from making signings. And he helped them during that season under Frank Lampard without any incomings bar Pulisic, and Kovacic obviously was already there. Without anything really extra being brought in to get them into the top four, with him as their main striker, and to an FA Cup final, which we obviously won against them. So I don't think, and he scored at the Emirates. I was there at the Emirates when he scored that goal to make it 2-1 as well. So he scores against big teams. He scores a fair amount of goals, and he can be relied upon. He's an England international as well. Don't forget that either. And were it not for Timo Werner's signing, I would imagine he probably would have gone off to the Euros as well if he had been playing consistently as Chelsea striker once again. So I just don't think it's one that we should write off immediately, and it's one that we should, consider. And it just depends upon the finances associated with the deal. Igbo says, why sign Balogun with assurance of first team football and talk about Abraham? It's a good question. Because, of course, we've talked about the age profile of striker that we should look for, and does saying that Tammy Abraham block that route? And you'd probably argue, yes, it probably does. But just because you've signed a player to a new contract doesn't mean that you have to force, doesn't mean you don't have to force him, doesn't mean you don't have to give him competition. And I'd be open to sending Balogun on loan this season. I'd be open to sending him on loan to a team to say, look, go get a full season under your belt somewhere as a starting striker at a good level, Championship or low-level Premier League, where you're going to play every week, and go prove that you should be an Arsenal striker instead of playing in the under-23s or being on the bench. Go and prove that you should be an Arsenal man. That's what I want to see really from Balogun this season, and Aziz as well. I'd love to see Aziz go and get a full season loan as well. And of course, if any other players do go on loan, we will be making sure to cover them in plenty of detail. So make sure that you are subscribed for that content. Anyway, that's going to wrap up today's show. I've done 40 minutes of transfer news and Q&A for you too. I hope you've appreciated it. Please do drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed the content. I'll be back with you guys tomorrow morning for the 8 a.m. show once again. 2 more days that I'm away, and then back to the usual business of producing plenty of Arsenal content for you guys. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us over on Twitter at the Gooner Talk TV, and let us know what you think about all of Arsenal's possible transfer business that we've talked about today. See you again very, very soon, guys, and as always, up the Arsenal.